Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, Pro Football Playbook Podcast listeners. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. Welcome into the show, Keith. We're talking AFC North today.
Yeah, AFC North, it's been one of those divisions that's been super competitive, very kind of a slog to get through it because there's always good teams. They may not necessarily be Super Bowl like favorites or anything like that, but there's usually multiple good teams in this division every year, and that makes for a lot of fun. And I think, we've seen Cleveland rise up a little bit, and then maybe take a step back last year. But other than them, the rest of this division has been decent for the last, few years. And it just makes for a fun division. I mean, and you had one of the Super Bowl teams from this division last year.
It's a super fun division. It's super competitive. It's changing all the time because all the teams are really starting to stay on top. There's different moving parts and so forth. You mentioned teams that have been relevant for a long time. Talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Absolutely.
Like the Pittsburgh Steelers or not, they've been relevant for 20 years. And now they're in this transition thing. Ben Roethlisberger's finally moved on. And Keith Butler, their longtime defensive coordinators, is gone. They hired Terrell Austin to come in and be their new coordinator. I don't see a lot of changes there. It's kind of more of a continuity move for them. But the big news is that Mitch Trubisky is coming in to kind of take charge of the team there after Roethlisberger moves on, unfortunately, in the offseason here just days ago. In fact, some very unfortunate news out of Pittsburgh with Dwayne Haskins dying after being hit on the freeway after a practice session down in Florida. Really kind of disrupts their quarterback room a little bit there as well. So there's a lot of talk about them needing a quarterback. Even with the Trubisky move, we all probably understand that's probably a placeholder type of situation for them long term. I think they may want to solve that. I don't know if they do that in this draft. They've got the number 20 pick overall in the first round to kind of address that if they wanted to. But there are a few other team needs. I think offensive line, defensive line, wide receiver, safety, backup running back. I mean, you kind of have a list there. And it's a team that's, again, probably looking at the bottom of the division, I think, in 2022.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is a team in transition, and Roethlisberger's been there forever, and he hasn't been good the last couple of years. So this idea that they're going to take a step back without him, I think, is I don't agree with, because he's just like last year. Honestly, he was bad. And so the drop between him and Trubisky, I don't know if Trubisky's not an improvement.
I think it is actually an upgrade.
And that's saying a lot because Trubisky's not a good player. But Roethlisberger should have retired a year ago or 2 years ago.
Right. And I think Mitch Trubisky runs that style of offense actually pretty well for them. I think, coming in and reading, he can get to the outside a little bit. He's got a little bit of athleticism to him, a dink and dunk kind of a guy. I think, Pittsburgh wants to win with their defense, holding teams down a little bit, creating turnovers, and then having their quarterback just kind of do enough. And so who knows? They may limp along in this season and surprise a little bit, but it depends on what they do in the draft, I think.
Yeah, and this is a team also that, they haven't had a losing season since 2003, and so I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly. And so are they going to take this big step back? I don't know. I think they're in a position to kind of make that transition. And this is probably a decent year for them to start looking at potential long-term solution at quarterback, because I keep saying the quarterbacks in this draft class aren't going to be great. There's not going to be, that run of them the first, second, and third overall in the draft. They're going to start coming off the board at, there might be one at 6, one at 14, and then whoever's the third best quarterback Like Ritter, the guy out of Cincinnati, he'll be sitting there available at 20. And if they like him, they want to do it, they don't have to move up to get their guy. They can just wait and get him there.
The thing about the Pittsburgh Steelers this year too, Keith, is they've been involved in meeting with every single one of the top 5 quarterbacks in this draft class as well. Worked them out, gone to their pro days, had meetings with each individual player at the combine and so forth. So they're really doing their due diligence to find out if their guy is here in this draft. Or if they put it off for another year. And they weren't horrible last year. They were 9-7-1. I think really both of us know, and everyone out there knows, that Ben Roethlisberger was holding them back from improving upon that record. They had an opportunity to kind of have been a better team, maybe a couple additional wins, and some playoff opportunities there. But I don't know that they did too much in the offseason. They did get Miles Jack to a 2-year deal to play along with Devin Bush. That's a nice tandem to have. They upgraded their offensive line in a couple of small deals. Other than that, though, they still need a lot of help, I think. And they do have some draft capital up front in the draft to help.
Losing Juju Smith-Schuster, I think, is a bigger loss for them offensively than people want to admit right now, because he's, a very good player. Losing Joe Hayden at cornerback, I think, is a big problem. So, but they did get Miles Jack at linebacker, who I think is underrated, and he's going to be a difference maker for them. So, they need some help on the offensive side. I think they need a wide receiver. I think they need, and they need to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. And the nice thing is, because they went and got Trubisky, if they don't like who's there at 20, they can just punt it off and do it next year.
Yeah. Another guy that I think that would be an absolutely outstanding signing if he's there at 20 would be Jordan Davis for them, because they finished 32nd in the league defending the run last year. He'd be a guy you can plug right in. It also gives you some bonus athleticism to get to the quarterback as well. They really probably would be wise for them, I think, to pass on the quarterback this year. Mitch Trubisky is not going to be horrible, and you kind of build the team around an opportunity to address the situation next year. And I think by having pick at 20 and then again at 52 really allows them to kind of go best player available for them on a couple different position groups that, I don't know. I see them coming out of this draft okay. I don't necessarily think that they finish in the bottom, but they're not quite ready to make another jump. They've got a couple of years here of building.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think that I don't know if they take a huge step back. I still think they're a team that's going to finish just over 500 and compete for, that last playoff spot. But at the same time, I don't feel that they're, one of those teams that you got to watch out for as being making a Super Bowl run. There's too many questions at too many important positions, even though the rest of the roster is still pretty solid.
So the next team up that we're going to talk about is the Baltimore Ravens. What happened to Baltimore last year, Keith? I mean, they started 8-3 and they finished on a 6-game losing streak to finish the season.
They tried their hardest to keep things rolling, kind of with some smoke and mirrors at times. They lost, I think, their top 4 running backs to injury relatively quickly, and they were just piecing stuff together. So they didn't have a running game to help out Jackson. They didn't have the greatest weapons on the outside, and the offensive line kind of started to fall apart too. And really, so offensively, they just could not have enough success to make it work.
Jackson himself missed 5 total games for
That's a good point.
The last 4 games as well in a row. And by then it was over. New signings, I thought they did okay. Actually, Morgan Moses at offensive tackle, I thought was a good value. Michael Pierce at defensive tackle, an excellent defensive tackle. Marcus Williams, one of the best safeties on the market from New Orleans, comes over. They re-signed Calais Campbell, which is a great signing. Even though he's getting old, he still has an effect on the game. I think that Morgan Moses plays right tackle, and Ronnie Stanley is at left tackle, but he's only played 7 games in the last 2 years. I think that's an area where I could see them
Absolutely.
going with a pick here. And with the 14th pick overall in the draft, that's a really nice spot to be at in the draft. You've got Trevor Penning sitting there. Brayman's going to be available a little later if you wanted to trade back a little bit. You might have a player, one of the left tackles fall in this class. There's been, like a Charles Cross might be sitting there possibly, depending on the teams in front of them, what their needs are. But they've got an opportunity here. They've got a tremendous amount of draft capital, 2/3, 5 4th-round picks, and then 4 early picks, actually. They've got the 14th and then the 45th pick, and then the 76th overall pick as well, and then the 100th pick. So they're sitting actually pretty decent to be able to add to their core rotation type of players and depth.
They've got 10 picks in this draft coming in. I would not shock me to see them move up a little bit if there's a player they really covet. If they really want Charles Cross or Trevor Penning to anchor that offensive line and really help them, they have the ammunition to move up and to go from 14 to, say, 9 at Seattle, and go get the guy they want instead of waiting to see what other teams do. They have the ammunition. You come in with 10 picks into the draft. I mean, that's one of the advantages.
Yeah. And they have an opportunity to move around a little bit so that, when you get into the 4th round, you've got 4 4th-round picks. Man, if you want somebody, you're targeting somebody that's still there in the 3rd, you can package a few of those things to get back up and get your guy. So they do have a great opportunity here. Their front office is always drafted well. And it's one of the teams that I'm going to be looking at the draft to kind of find out exactly what they do. And that spot, like you mentioned, the 14th pick overall, they do have enough ammunition to move around just a little bit. If that draft falls a certain way, say a couple, 1 or 2 quarterbacks is taken in the top 10, that really does dramatically shift the type of players that are going to be pushed back a little bit. And they may come up and grab somebody. You just never know. If they did go from 14 to 9, what would you think the tackle position would be the target?
Yeah, I think getting if somebody falls, and so they're looking at being able to get one of the top tackles at 9, or somewhere in that range, like that would be, I think, what they would go up for. Wide receiver is a need on this team, but you don't trade up for that in this draft. There's too many good ones. You can wait and get a good one in the 2nd round. Like there's no reason to do any of that in this draft. And the other thing, that they're looking at is running back, and there's no, in my opinion, there's no Ezekiel Elliott that someone wants to take in the 1st round or anything like that. There are some really good running backs, but they're going to be 2nd and 3rd round players. So I mean, it really tackles kind of the one thing that I look at on this. They're also going to want an edge rusher, and maybe that's what it is. And maybe it's, maybe it's one of the edge rushers are sitting there and they go, wow, we can, have our defense go back to being, pretty dang elite if we can get one of these top guys. Maybe that's who they move up and get.
Yeah, a guy like Karlaftis would be a good fit for them, even if they stayed at 14. I think that would be a good, solid guy that defends the run really well right now with quite a bit of upside, actually, at rushing the passer. I like the idea of the tackle early. If you go wide receiver, you got, guys like Sky Moore and the kid from Boise State and some of the other, there's a few other spots right there, Christian Watson, that would be available in that, 45 pick overall. And then at 76, you can go have your choice pretty much. 1, 2, or 3 of the top 3 or 4 running backs in this draft: Dameon Pierce, Isaiah Spiller. Yeah. So I like the way that they're positioned. We'll find out if they execute.
Well, this front office is and has been one of the best and most consistent over the last 15 years. I trust Baltimore to do good things with those picks. You just don't have that much sustained success through the draft if you're not good at it, and they're really good at it. So they're in position to get players that they need, and I expect them to get them.
I agree. And the only other position that I think that they could look at, and then we'll move on, is Calais Campbell and Brandon Williams at defensive tackle are both over 33 years old. Justin Houston and Pernell McPhee are over 32 years old at linebacker. You can take a look at defensive tackle and linebacker in this draft too.
Yep, front seven.
Cleveland Browns. Wow. What an offseason. I didn't think they were going to have an offseason, really, kind of. They just seemed like that boring in-between position where you don't know if they're getting better or they're getting worse. And then they go out and pull off that Deshaun Watson trade. Really kind of changed everything. And certainly changed the dynamics in the division. What did you think of the trade?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a huge risk there because we don't know if Watson is going to play most of the year because of, any kind of suspension and all that. So there is a lot of risk there, especially because they take their quarterback and they throw him under the bus, and he's probably not going to be in uniform for this team anymore. But they may need him for the first 8 games if Watson gets suspended. So we'll see how that goes.
I don't think it's going to go well, regardless, because Baker Mayfield obviously his feelings are hurt. The team kind of, didn't do him a favor at all in this entire fiasco so far. For him, it's a fiasco. And Jacoby Brissett has come in, Josh Dobbs, so they've already filled out their roster with quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they would want him to start at this point because of that relationship. And I don't know that Baker would, I don't know. I mean, that's a very complicated situation. My best guess is that he gets dealt here during the draft or right up before the draft.
My guess is he may not. Because his value is incredibly low. There's like 2 teams right now that are out looking for a quarterback of his caliber. And the question remains whether either of them want him. That would be Seattle and Carolina. The Cleveland's play might be to wait this out and wait until early in training camp and wait for a quarterback to like blow out a knee and go down. And then that team being like, oh, we got to go get someone. Baker Mayfield's available. Let's toss them a 3rd round pick and get him to save the season for us. That may be their play. But at the same time, it's a rough situation. And I think that ultimately we can talk about how that's going to play out, but does it change anything about this team this year? I don't think it does, because Deshaun Watson's the guy, and he's a legit top 5 quarterback in the NFL. He didn't play last year. We know that. There's been, everything we've talked about that. I think we can skip over that for this particular show and recognize that he's going to be very good. And they went and got Amari Cooper, so they were able to get him a big-time weapon to go with some of the other weapons they've got. They've got a good running game. They've got a good offensive line. This is a offense that's ready to compete. The defense, on the other hand, has Myles Garrett and a lot of question marks. Most of what you're going to see them do in this draft is going to be to address their defense. They need help at defensive tackle. They need help at pass rusher. They need help at linebacker. They need help at safety.
And you know what? And the draft lines up perfectly for them on that.
It kind of does. Yeah.
Which is amazing. It is. I mean, they probably designed a little bit of that. They do have, they did sign, oh gosh, I just had it.
We signed David Njoku at 10, which actually other thing I didn't even mention is a big help for them. Offensively.
Well, they lost Austin Cooper, and they lost Jarvis Landry as well.
That's true.
So they did get Amari Cooper. They got Anthony Walker, linebacker, to a 1-year, $5 million deal to come play with them again. Tavon Bryan is the guy I was thinking about, kind of come in and being a run stuffer kind of a guy for them. I thought that was a decent move. But other than that, their defensive line is really in flux. They didn't bring back some of their guys that they had. They're still sitting out there, and I think they're kind of waiting to find out what they do in the draft. And so their defense does look somewhat incomplete. They did have a 5-year extension for Denzel Ward the other day I saw that was pretty rich, I think $120 million or something like that, Keith. Solidifies their back end, but they could probably use another guy opposite that. So they could use Their defensive line, I think, is probably their largest need in this. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
You mentioned wide receiver and safety and possibly another running back to add to this room as well. And picks at 44, 78, and 99 plus 118 there in the top 118. So they got 4 picks there through round 4. I think that they can probably address the needs that they do have in the right value pockets without really moving around too much. You mentioned defensive tackle. You could get a really decent one. Perry and Winfrey comes to mind. There's a few others at 44, at 78. You could get, a corner or a safety at that spot that's going to be, one of the top 3 or 4, safeties in this draft is probably going to be still sitting there. Yeah, just a lot of options for Cleveland. Where do you see them finishing this year with Deshaun Watson? It all depends on kind of, on his suspension type stuff. But let's just say
you can't predict.
They start the year with him. Where would they likely finish if they start the year with Deshaun?
Oh, if
he
Watson
plays all 17 games.
If Watson does not get suspended and gets to play all 17 games, this is a team that is poised to get into the playoffs and do some damage there. I don't know.
Are they poised to challenge Cincinnati for the division?
I don't think defensively they are. I think Cincinnati is still the better team overall, but they took a step forward at Cincinnati, and they did it at the most important position. And that's really what matters. They're going to be a tough team, a tough out. They have a chance to make some noise in the playoffs. And when was the last time that we said that and really believed it about Cleveland? It's been a while.
Yeah. And they've had a kind of almost their roster for 2 or 3 years now. And Baker Mayfield just ended up not being able to get him over the hump. And Deshaun Watson's the kind of talent I think that does, depending on who he's got around him. I think they could probably add another target there, either at tight end or at wide receiver to pair with Amari Cooper.
And they could also go look at a center like Tyler Linderbaum there at the 31st overall pick. That would be something that would be useful for them. That it's a possibility. I don't know. I still think they go defense early and often in this draft, and so that's where I lean for them. But they were close with Baker Mayfield. With Watson, if they were close with Mayfield, they're there with Watson. He's that much of an upgrade.
So they let Jarvis Landry go. And besides Cooper, all they've got is Donovan Peoples-Jones, led the team with 597 yards receiving last year. And Anthony Schwartz, a guy that's a project, had more speed and track kind of background, if I remember correctly from last year's draft, not at all polished as a wide receiver. We'll see what he does in year 2, but that's it. And so I really do think that wide receiver might actually be the pick at 44, get that kind of skill position thing solidified, and then go fill out, the defensive line with some value there at 78 and 99. Okay. Cincinnati Bengals. Wow. What a run that they put together last year to just kind of close out the division, get in the playoffs, go deep in the playoffs, and really a nice surprise. Good to see Joe Burrow rebound from the ACL in his rookie campaign, come back and just nail it.
Oh, and they were in the Super Bowl. They were leading in the Super Bowl late in the game. Kind of ran out of speed defensively, but overall, they were way better, way more ahead of schedule than I think any of us kind of wanted to admit early on, because I still believe that last year was not their year. This year is their year. They were set up with their draft capital, their salary cap, the way they had been building their roster. Last year was supposed to be kind of their setup year, and this coming season is supposed to be the year where they take that big step forward and really assert themselves on the AFC. And they did what they needed to do this offseason for the most part in order to set themselves up and be ready for to make that run. They used their salary cap room to affect the right positions. And I'm sorry, what the Bengals are a force. And if you were thinking that last year was a fluke, I think you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, they're no fluke.
They're a good team.
Yeah. Now I remember when we first started our show in November, one of the ongoing conversations we had is, what about the Cincinnati Bengals? What are the Cincinnati Bengals going to do? And I distinctly remember a couple different conversations. Just like, I'm just not sure. I don't think that they're ready this year. I think next year's their year, and we said that, quite a few different times,
And I still
they just kept winning.
I still believe that last year was them setting up for this year to be a great year. And what was the biggest weakness for the Cincinnati Bengals last year? It was
Offensive
their
line.
offensive line, which was honestly kind of terrible. And Joe Burrow and those weapons made it work anyway. And then what did they go out and do this offseason? They went and got themselves a tackle in La'el Collins. They got themselves a guard with Alex Kappa. They got themselves probably a center with Ted Carrasco.
At least a placeholder. Yeah.
Yeah, he can play at different positions. If nothing else, he's going to be a utility backup who can come in and play at a reasonably decent level at a bunch of different positions.
Right.
They have guys now that they didn't have last year.
And they got a tight end in Hayden Hurst, which is, a little underrated there. I think that's a good signing for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, I agree. They needed to do that. They did that. I think initially solved some of that. They still have a strong draft coming up. Now, they don't pick until the 31st pick overall, but they could still address a few things. Now, at pick 31, you might be able to get the first or second available center in this draft. If you wanted a long-term answer at center, I think that they would. If Linderbaum was sitting there, I think you run up to the podium if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, because there's a guy that's going to be snapping balls to Joe Burrow for the next 10 years. And that would solidify that whole offensive line right there. And I seriously would highly consider that. And then you've got pick 63 and 95 overall. That you can solidify some of your other spots. You've got offensive guard. You could go for depth there. Behind Hayden Hurst, you really don't have a lot in your tight end room. In fact, they were ranked 30th in the league in tight end targets last year. And that was with Drew Sample there and Thaddeus Moss, a rookie out of LSU from last year. And so they could give him a few more weapons there. And at tight end, that would be a good value spot, either in the back end of the third round at 95 or 136 overall.
I will say, if they're going to, I expect them to go offensive line and continue to bolster that, because that was their big weakness. They want to turn it into a strength because everything just gets better with that. But one position they really need to address that I don't believe they've done anything with in a meaningful way up to this point is cornerback. They ran through a bunch of guys. You had guys like Eli Apple out there during the Super Bowl.
And they re-signed him for a minimum deal. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are okay, but they're not guys that you want out there.
Well, you have
in a big game against a big guy.
Chidobe Awuzie and Mike Hilton is great in the slot, but they don't have anybody else. They don't have anybody opposite Chidobe Awuzie.
Yeah. I mean, look what Cooper Kupp did to them. Cooper Kupp just ate them alive. And that was without the other guys, because they were the rest of the receivers and everyone on the Rams were hurt, and Kupp ate them alive anyways. They need to go get a corner.
I think the perfect corner for them in this draft at 31 would be Career Elam. Long, physical, cover corner, press man, cover corner, a guy that could be opposite Awuzie and be essentially your number one lockdown corner of the future. He would be a tremendous signing for that ball club.
Oh, that gets their defense and really gets things. It turns kind of a weakness into a strength, and they've already kind of upgraded the offensive line, but I do think they need at least one more starter to come out of this draft on the offensive line. So, I mean, you've got a couple of needs, but this is a draft, and they're in draft position to fill those and get guys that are going to come in and be impact players. and this was
This,
already a Super Bowl team.
yeah. So this is
They
a
were a Super
situation.
Bowl team, and now they're better.
This is a situation where you could see a team like Cincinnati taking future draft capital to move up into this into the first round again, say package 263 and another maybe next year's first round pick to move up into the first round even further to maybe address the corner and offensive line situation for them, because really that's what they need. If they came out of this draft with those two positions locked up, starters, watch out. That's really it.
If they go corner with the first round pick at 31 and get Elam, watch for a guy like Kennard with that second pick out of Kentucky.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot,
and
because you got Joe Mixon running the ball.
Yeah,
you could have a road grader style offensive lineman added to the Bengals. Oh, I like
and
that.
that's a guy that and he's going to be available in that range, I believe. And so he's a guy that you kind of just bring in, you put him there. Is he a great pass blocker? No, not yet. But he's a road grader. He's going to get Mixon going. That running game will make life easier for Burrow and company, because it's just going to slow down the pass rush. So that would be a path that I would watch for them, is to go cornerback and then go try and get Kennard.
Wow, fun. That's a fun little division. There's a lot of intrigue there with some options for teams to make headway against Cincinnati too. Cleveland is obviously going to be a major competitor, and then Baltimore. You bring back Jackson without the injuries, and you go through the additions that they're going through. It, they could definitely be an 11-win team. I think again they started 8-3 for goodness sake, and they really haven't diminished overall, I don't think. So we'll see what happens. And then of course Pittsburgh, I think is still going to be at the bottom, but they're not horrible.
Bad. They were a playoff team last year, and I don't see them taking a step back. Everyone's like, oh, they're turning over, they're rebuilding, Roethlisberger's gone. Roethlisberger needed to leave a year or two earlier. He was holding that team back. And the idea that Trubisky is going to be worse, I think is not giving Trubisky
it's not going to be worse.
Quite enough credit for, he was not good in Chicago, but he wasn't nearly as bad as I think people think. And it also, he doesn't have to be good to be better than Roethlisberger last year.
Yeah, and he had a chance to sit on Buffalo's roster last year and maybe take a little bit of seasoning there from an offense that was just really good and pick up a few things. I was going to say, we did our last show on the AFC West, and we declared that by all means, no questions asked, the best division in football. Where do you think this division ranks?
Number two.
Wow.
And the thing is, this division has been very tough and very competitive year in and year out, because Baltimore's always there, Pittsburgh's always there, Cincinnati has been up and down. Last year they were a Super Bowl team, and Cleveland's been that one doormat for a long time, but they have really, they made the playoffs a couple of years ago. Last year was a step back, but then they went and made this massive trade for Watson to get them over the hump and make them into that perennial playoff team as well. All four of these teams can compete for a playoff spot. I don't think that any of them except for Cincinnati are as good as the AFC West teams, but all four teams are going to be above 500 again. I just think that's how it's going to work out. You're going to have one team kind of win this division, probably Cincinnati, and the other three teams are going to be right there around 10 wins, battling it out. And it's a good division. There's no doormat. There's no easy win in this division.
All right, let's get out of here. Next up is going to be the AFC South. So I look forward to that show, but wrap this one up. Thanks, Keith. I appreciate all the information. That was awesome. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at Alvstad NFL. This show is at PF_Playbook. And you can find us on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube, and subscribe. Take care, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.